Good evening. Such an honor and a pleasure to be here today with these fantastic people from Stand With Us and all of the guests here who are supportive of their fantastic work that they have been doing on campuses here in Britain as well as in other places in the world. But I have to say that when I was invited to come and speak here with you today, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be speaking about. I mean, this room, we just saw, I always knew Stand With Us is doing a great job, but before coming here, I got a paper explaining exactly the kind of activity and the things that they've been doing here in the UK in particular. And I've seen here an organization that believes that education is the road to peace. An education that believes and knows that knowledge of the facts will correct common prejudice. An organization that has held 5 national educational conferences of Israel in Focus, attended by hundreds of students, student leaders, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. An organization that is running educational campaigns, countering the barrage of anti-Israeli sentiments and activities, organizing rallies, building coalitions on campuses, empowering future leaders of pro-Israeli activity. And then I came today and I was thinking to myself, what should I be speaking about? I mean, this room is full of fantastic people who are deeply passionate about Israel and truly knowledgeable about it. So what can I possibly contribute to this group? So eventually I decided that I would simply share my story and my experiences with you, hoping that it will bring something new and interesting to the table. 6 years ago, when I was still working as a lawyer, I took a decision that changed the course of my life quite dramatically. I applied to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Becoming a diplomat is not something common where I come from. I've never met an Israeli, let alone an Arab, who was a diplomat. Some of my friends were very impressed with my decision and with me being accepted. I'm going to live in various new countries, meet different cultures, interact with important people, and represent my country. Others, however, found my decision to be somewhat unwise, to say the least. As one of them told the media a few months ago, either he's a masochist or he doesn't understand the reality he lives in. But most of the debates that I had involved genuine dialogue, and I was asked tough questions. Questions like, why represent those who are considered to be your enemies? Aren't you afraid of losing your identity? What is it that you want to achieve? And I think these are important questions, and I'd like to share my thoughts about them with you today. In a way, this journey of mine started at a much younger age. As a kid, I went to the French elementary school in Jaffa, Collège des Frères. I was a Christian Orthodox kid in a French Catholic school with a majority of Muslim students in the Jewish country in the Arab Middle East. And nothing seemed more normal. But when I was 14 years old, my parents decided to send me to one of the best high schools in Tel Aviv, Ironi Dalet. They wanted me to have the best education possible. But it was a Jewish school, and I was suddenly the only Arab in my class. And then, 2 years into my studies, the peace talks, it was the year 2000, and the peace talks broke down, and the Second Intifada began. And these were terrible days, days of terror, of violence and rockets. In response, Israel launched a military campaign called Defensive Shield in the West Bank. Everyone was angry and scared. And my teacher in class decided to discuss the situation with us. Now, as the only Arab in my class, with a family living in the West Bank, a family that I used to visit every second weekend, I became the voice of the Palestinians. And I believe, and I hope, I was able to show my Jewish classmates how things look from the Palestinian perspective. But just like my classmates were listening to me, I was also listening to them. And I found myself in a unique situation. While it felt natural to speak up for the Arabs, I could also easily relate to the Jewish and Israeli story. I learned that we come from different places, but we share common fears and common hopes. However, in some places in the Arab community, my attempts to present the Israeli perspective were not always welcomed. For example, whenever I condemned terror attacks, the answer was, yes, but. Yes, but the Israelis started. But it is a natural reaction to occupation. But you cannot judge someone who is under oppression. Anything that did not serve the narrative of historic injustice was rejected. Anything that did not present the Palestinians as victims and the Israelis as perpetrators was dismissed. When I was working as an Israeli diplomat in Norway, I had a reminder of that mindset. The Palestinian Authority has a policy that all the Palestinians that are imprisoned in Israel for terrorism are to be given a grant and a monthly salary. The way it works is simple. The greater the crime, the more money you get. And among those, you can find the most veteran prisoner, Isa Abed Rabbo, who killed 2 young students in the year 1984. In addition to the grant and the salary, the PA also offered to cover the expenses of his wedding. Now, to remind you, the budget of the Palestinian Authority relies heavily on foreign donations. And in the year 2012 alone, 16% of those foreign donations, 155 million US dollars, money of Norwegian and British taxpayers, among others, was paid to terrorists. So I took this information and I presented it to my Norwegian counterparts, who promised to look into it. And a few weeks later, I was invited to a follow-up meeting at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Norwegians told me that they brought it up with the Palestinian Authority, and the answer they got was, yes, it is true that we pay terrorists, but no, we will not stop it. They made it clear to the Norwegians that they would rather see the funds stop and the Palestinian Authority collapse before taking a decision to stop sending that money. We are the victims, they explained, and those people are heroes, and therefore stopping those salaries, those payments, would be considered as nothing less than betrayal. And friends, this mindset, either in the big politics or in the everyday discussions that I have, makes me worried. Because the thing with victimhood is, it robs us of our dignity. When a group defines itself as victims, it relinquishes all responsibility. Victims are no longer held accountable for the things they do, including terrible crimes. They want others to change, forgetting that it is also they who may have to change. And without changing, even if the Palestinians will have a state, they won't be free. Because in order to be free, you have to let go of the hate. About 3 years ago, during my first month in Norway, I met Mariam. Mariam is not Norwegian, nor Jewish or Arab. Mariam is Iranian, and her father is, up to this very day, one of the most prominent ayatollahs of the Iranian regime in Iran. She told me that in school, all the children have to stand together every morning outside in the yard and shout out, "Down with America, down with Israel." And when Mariam was 12 years old, her teacher had asked her classmates, her class, to prepare a paper explaining why Israel should not exist. Mariam was top of her class in this assignment. But with time, Mariam began to rethink. She began realizing that reality did not always match the narrative she grew up upon. And when she visited Hezbollah in Lebanon as an honorary guest just a few years ago, it became clear to her that her government, and her father included, is deceiving her and her society. She saw how people were taken advantage of in order to serve an ideology bent on victimhood and of blaming and hating others. An ideology that leans on conspiracy theories instead of hard work, openness, honesty, and responsibility. Maryam refused to be a part of it, so she left home. Maryam and I had many political discussions over the years since we met. She never became a pro-Israeli activist, and she has a lot of criticism of Israel's policies. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that a daughter of an Iranian Ayatollah and an Arab Israeli diplomat were no longer perpetrators and victims, but friends and partners. What makes Maryam so special is her courage to look forward and to let go of hate. And a few months ago, Maryam established the Center for Cultural Diplomacy and Development. You can look it up, ccdd.info. And she is now bringing a new generation of Iranians, Israelis, and Arabs closer through economic and cultural cooperation. Instead of becoming a victim of the circumstances, Maryam became an agent of hope. And friends, I believe that just like Maryam, we in the Arab world should reject the paralyzing and corrupting mindset of victimhood. We need to look forward and take responsibility. Our culture is too rich, too deep, and far too important to be reduced to resentment towards Israel and the West. And unless we want to be slaves to the past, we simply cannot afford to be prisoners in a world of frustration and hate. And what is happening now in the Middle East is a testimony that at the end of the day, hate destroys the hater. Last month, I was celebrating Easter with my community and family in Jaffa. And we have a tradition in Jaffa of a big Easter parade in the main street with colorful uniforms, great food, and live music. And as you were told, even during my 6 years abroad, I made sure that every year I'm in Jaffa for Easter so I can play my trumpet with my marching band. And I'm sure each one of you has a kid as a neighbor, the annoying kid that keeps playing his trumpet, disturbing everyone else. I'm that kid. But at the same time, while I was playing my trumpet, enjoying Easter with my family and my community, it was not hard. It was hard not to remember that outside Israel, Easter celebrations have become a rare sight in the Middle East. Christians were driven out of Mosul in Iraq, where they have lived for over 2,000 years. Christians are put to flight in Syria. The last church in Afghanistan was destroyed in the year 2010. 30 Christians were beheaded in Libya just a few days ago. And in Gaza, bishops are beaten up and Christian symbols are forbidden. The persecution of Christians, as well as other minorities in our region, like the Kurds or the Yazidis, has of course nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. But it has everything to do, I believe, with the hate towards Israel. There's a question that I get quite often from mostly other Arabs. They say, George, you're an Arab, you're a Christian. Why on earth would the persecution of Jews be so important to you? Why do you care so much? My answer is that I care because anti-Semitism is not about Jews. And nothing would be more tragic than to continue seeing it as a Jewish issue. Friends, why is it that for so many centuries Jews have lived in fear? Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi for this country, explains the reason as follows: because Jews were always different. Across the centuries, they refused over time and in many ways to give up their unique faith, culture, or identity. They may have integrated, but they never assimilated. And that has presented a great challenge to Europe by forcing it to answer, or face at least, one of the most important questions of morality. Can we tolerate a nation that insists on being different? Can we live peacefully with a people that constantly insists on the right to be different and on the dignity of being different? Jews lived for the right to be different, and they died because of the inability to tolerate that right. It is hard not to wonder how the Middle East would have looked like had the Arab world welcomed the Jews, saying, "Welcome back, our home is also your home." However, while the Jews accepted various plans for the partition of the land for two states, an Arab and Jewish, the Arabs rejected them. About 74% of the people in the Middle East today hold anti-Semitic attitudes. More than 70% of Palestinians, Jordanians, and Algerians said in 2007 that the Arab world should not recognize Israel even if there would be a peace agreement. Why is it that the mere idea of a Jewish state invoked so much rejection and hate? Mark Twain once said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme." By establishing the State of Israel, the Arab world had to face the question, can we tolerate a nation that is different and that insists on being different? Can we live peacefully with a neighboring country that is neither Arab nor Muslim? Sadly, up to this very day, the answer remains no. Wars of annihilation, terror, boycott, demonization, and incitement. These are all the outcome of the notion that the Middle East has no room for Jews. In Europe, Jews paid a price for not giving up their connection to their God. And in the Middle East, they pay a price for not giving up their connection to their home. An old hate is reborn with a new excuse. Why should this matter to us, those who are not Jewish? Because, friends, the simple yet evident truth is that we are all different. In fact, being different is what makes us human. Every culture and every faith is unique, and each one of us is irreplaceable. And the Middle East, that has no room for Jews, has no room for humanity. Jews were not the only victims of Nazism, and today, with the ethnic strife and religious bloodshed in our region, and the persecution of Christians and other minorities, we can see that once again, Jews are not the only victims of that intolerance, only the first. And if we wish to have a future in our region, we must work together, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and to create space for our difference, create space for our diversity. Our common challenges may be new, but the values that will determine our success, honesty, courage, and tolerance, are old. And it is time that we return to those values. Nothing less than our shared humanity is at stake. In the past, when the Muslim world was more pluralistic and more tolerant, the result was creation, innovation, and progress. Jews recall the period between the 9th and the 12th century as the Golden Age, especially in Andalusia. And that was the time that the Muslim world invented algebra, developed architecture, reintroduced Greek philosophy, and built the first hospital in the world. But today, it seems as if fear and tyranny has led us to a cultural failure. In the year 1999, the Egyptian scientist Ahmed Zewail received a Nobel Prize for chemistry. He did a brilliant research, but he received the prize as an American scientist, not as Egyptian. When the Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak then called him, he asked him to come back to Egypt and do his research there. But Zewail asked him fearlessly, "What is the budget for research in Egypt? What is the budget for research in the Arab world comparing to the Western world?" According to the World Bank, the EU invests 3.1% of its GDP in research and development. The United States invests 2.7% of its GDP in research and development. And the Arab world invests, shamefully, only 0.1% on R&D. Clearly, Zewail never returned to Egypt. Friends, whenever a nation, from Athens to the United States, welcomed different peoples and cultures, science, art, philosophy, and technology thrived. However, whenever a nation tried to purify its ranks, from Spain of the Inquisition to Nazi Germany and today's political Islam, it lost its soul, and with it any chance to make progress. The logic is simple. Only when you are open to people who are different can you be open to ideas that are different. But friends, what if there was a country in the Middle East that believed that real knowledge is obtained through hard questions, painful criticism, and a lack of control over what might be asked or answered? What if that country understood that true education cannot allow banning books for alleged religious reasons, nor the labeling of certain types of research as blasphemous or inappropriate? What if that country invested in research and development even more than the European Union and the United States? What if it was helping Asia and Africa to grow more food using less water with a revolutionary drip irrigation technology? What if the passion of that country about knowledge and education was so strong that it produced an inordinate number of Nobel Prize winners? And what if that country raised chess champions, a world-leading cultural scene, and some of the world's best novelists? What if it developed advanced medical devices and treatments to cure illnesses never cured before? What if the spirit of that country was so innovative that it led the world in the number of startups per capita outside the Silicon Valley? And what if that country, my country, was willing to join hands with the Arab world and make it a partner in leading the world in agriculture, medicine, and technology? Wouldn't you say that this is the kind of partners the Arab world should seek? Isn't it time to learn from our failures instead of letting those failures define us? Isn't it time to fight the battles of tomorrow rather than those of yesterday? The story of Israel is a testimony to something profound: the ability of the few to outlast great powers by the sheer force of their commitment to diversity, freedom, and knowledge. Israel is where Christians like me can wear a cross and Jews can wear a kippah without fear. It is where the Baha'i has built their dazzling temple, where Muslim women can wear hijab anywhere, and where Druze and Circassians feel safe. And that pluralism has been the key in making Israel a world leader of innovation in every field, from technology to modern dance. Openness to people who are different brought openness to ideas that are different. And I believe that we, Israeli Arabs, can be a model to the Arab world by breaking the chains of fear and forging bonds of cooperation. We can be a part of the story of Israel. We can contribute to the common good of Israel without losing our unique identity. This is what I understood when I applied for this job. And I also think this is what my grandfather understood back in 1948. My grandparents, George and Vera, lived in Jaffa, where the Deek family has lived for over 400 years. But when Israel declared its independence in 1948, 5 Arab armies responded with a war aimed at one thing: its annihilation. They told the Palestinians to leave everything behind and flee until they would get rid of the Jews. The Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri Said put it bluntly: "We will smash that country with our guns and obliterate every place the Jews shelter in. The Arabs should conduct their wives and children to safe areas until the fighting has died down." So my grandparents, frightened by what might happen, left. And after a long journey, most of it by foot, they reached Lebanon. They stayed there for many months, and my grandmother gave birth to her first son, my uncle Sami. But when the war was over, they realized that they were deceived, that the Jews did not kill all the Arabs, and the Arabs did not win as promised. My grandfather looked around him and saw nothing but a dead-end life as refugees. He looked at his young wife, Vera, not even 18 years old yet, and his newborn son, and knew that they were about to become a part of the tragic story of the Palestinian refugees. he refused to accept that verdict. He wanted to go back to Jaffa. My grandfather George did what few others could or would have dared. He found a way to get back and to live among those that were considered his enemies. He and my grandmother came to Israel, worked hard, and they raised a family of educated and successful sons and daughters. And I'm proud today to be a part of that family. And the reason that I'm standing here in front of you today as an Israeli diplomat and not as a Palestinian refugee from Lebanon is because my grandfather had the courage to take a decision that was unthinkable to others. Rather than falling into despair, he found hope where no one else dared looking for it. He chose to live among those that were considered to be his enemies and to make them his friends. In other words, my grandparents made me and my family a part of the story of Israel. Our road and the Jewish road may be different, but our destiny is shared. For centuries, Jews in Europe kept their faith and their unique identity as a minority. And yet, not only did they contribute to the common culture, but with figures like Freud and Einstein, they revolutionized it. Are we, the Arabs, any less talented? I don't think so. Israeli Arabs are the most educated Arabs in the world, with the best living standards and opportunities in the region. We can contribute to the growth of Israeli society, not as outsiders, but as an integral part of it. We can be a minority, living in a country whose religion, nationality, and culture are not our own, and yet sustain our identity, live our faith, and contribute to the common good. It isn't easy. It carries the tension of multiple identities, and it involves facing discrimination. It's not for the faint-hearted. I too had to face occasional discrimination, and my father's grave was desecrated by price tag bullies who wrote "Death to the Arabs" on his grave. But friends, we simply cannot allow those agents of hate and despair to break us. This is the battle for our future, and we will win. And when we will win, when we begin our journey towards becoming a proud and integral part of the Israeli society, we will begin to fulfill our great mission to be mediators, a bridge between Israel and the Arab world. A few weeks ago, I was in the city of Nazareth, and I met a guy called Fadi Swidan, who leads the Nazareth Business Incubator Center, NIBC. Now, Israel is known to be the startup nation with the biggest number of patents per capita, hundreds of multinational R&D centers, billions of dollars in exits every year. But until 2009, Arabs accounted for only 0.5% of all high-tech employment in Israel. Fadi, with several others, had a dream to make the Arabs a part of the Israeli startup nation. What did they do? They built incubators. They brought Jewish partners. They engaged the government. And most importantly, they convinced mothers that being an entrepreneur is just as good as being a lawyer or a doctor. And you would know. And in less than 5 years, the numbers of Arabs in the Israeli high-tech sector grew from 300 to more than 2,000 today. For the first time, foreign governments now approach the Arab community from a business perspective rather than from a philanthropic one. You know today who's the most senior Israeli in the high-tech world? His name is Johnny Sarouji, an Arab from Haifa who is the vice president of Apple. And suddenly, Israeli Arabs became a bridge to the Arab world. With 130 million smartphones in the Middle East, Arabic is the fastest growing language over the internet. Now think about it. As native Arabic speakers with access to the ecosystem of the Israeli startup nation, who would be more fitting to bring the promise of innovation to the Arab world? So Fadi and his friends, they started a wave of startups and apps in Arabic, all directed to the Arab world, to our neighbors. And a trend began. One of their companies that I've talked to made more than 70 mobile apps used all over the Arab world today. And that company today is worth tens of millions of dollars. The Arab-Israeli entrepreneurs made the Arab community a part of the Israeli startup nation. And then they took the promise of the startup nation and they are bringing it to the rest of the region. What did they do differently from others? They replaced the question, "Who did this to me?" with a new question. What can I do now that was not possible before? I chose to be an Israeli diplomat because I believe this is the key for the kind of transformation I wish to be a part of. I don't think it's too late. History can change because we can change, and we are the makers of history. We can look forward and refuse to be victims. We can see strength in our differences rather than weakness. We can make friends of partners where we previously had enemies. And we can build bridges and bring a message of hope that someday the Middle East will become a place we can all call a home. In a few days, on May 10th, a ceremony will take place to name one of the squares in Jaffa after my late father, who passed away 6 years ago. And I received the news about this touching decision by Tel Aviv Jaffa municipality while I was working on this speech. And that reminded me of something. Because of the dilemmas and debates that I had about making the decision to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, becoming an Israeli diplomat, so I went to my father, who was and remained my role model. And I asked him what he thought about it. And I will never forget his answer. He said, "Son, if I were you, I wouldn't do it. But my job was to teach you how to think, not what to think." So friends, this is how I think. Thank you for listening.